Hello, and welcome to Rival Reds. We're here at the place in Leeds, and we've got a pint of Saltaire Blonde. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, mate.
I'm Rick, and we're here to discuss football.
Here. So, disappointing end to the season for both of our teams. Both of our teams basically eclipsed by a absolutely dominant Manchester City side. How do we put that right next season? And more specifically, how can United close that gap, which was at times just cavernous, on Man City last year? I think if we're being honest, City had the league won and sewn up by about December, January.
Felt like that.
Even though United finished second, it wasn't really a race. It wasn't. We were never second, but closing in and having a chance to win first. So it was a very hollow end to the season. And we are now in a position in the summer where Fellaini's just signed a new contract. We've just signed Stokes, reserve goalkeeper, and United fans are trying to find a reason to be optimistic going into this new season. So I want to try and give both sides of this. I want to try and say why I think there is cause to be optimistic. Because if you're not optimistic on the first day of football season, then you might as well give it up.
I guess more importantly for you guys, what do you need to do for you to be optimistic? It clearly sounds like at the moment you don't think you can catch them. But what needs to happen for you to be optimistic about catching them?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think, and again, this is speaking with the almost the cynical businessman hat on, but I think United's owners will be painfully aware of this, more so than the fans, but the mood is quite flat, and I think the first thing that would need to happen is an impact signing. I think a signing that captures the spirit and gives United fans a reason to be excited about the new season.
Bale/Ronaldo-esque.
Exactly. I think we need a signing like that. So far, signing Lee Grant from Stoke has been it's a signing.
I think I remember when you told me you'd signed him, I said, who
the hell is that? Yeah.
Who's he from?
He's certainly the finest reserve goalkeeper in the league.
That goes to Romero.
Romero.
Top point scorer in fantasy league. Points per game ratio.
And in all seriousness, Romero is the best backup I think we could ever have. This is
brings the question why you have signed Lee Grant. Is Romero being moved on, and does that weaken the United side?
The reason we signed Lee Grant is because rather than Romero being moved on, Pereira will be moved on. Our third choice goalkeeper at the moment, who is a kid, and the choice was basically to either let him go out on loan to get first team experience, or to have him as the third choice, in the hope that, barring some sort of monumental injury crisis, he won't actually get the game. And I think it's a smart choice. So I think as much of the piss that's been ripped out of United for signing Stoke's second choice keeper and thinking that'll be what catches City, it's not a bad signing on its own. It's a third choice keeper. He'll only play in the event of an injury meltdown or in a couple of cup games. He seems genuinely delighted to have signed for United, and I think it'll be a good signing.
Okay, but his taken aside, obviously Lee Grant is going to change the United side. You mentioned that you thought that a marquee signing would change the opinion of United supporters. But is that actually going to make a difference? You've signed Lukaku over the last 2 or 3 seasons. You've signed Lukaku. You've signed Ibrahimovic. You've signed Sanchez. You've made a lot of key and maybe what people would say also marquee signings over the last 3 seasons, which haven't, in my opinion, haven't really made a difference to the way you play. And for me, I think it's more about. I think the most worrying thing for you guys. Yeah, I don't think you were a second place team last season. You finished second, but I don't think you were worthy of it. I think everybody else gave up on second and had more important things going on. I think you crept into second without really doing anything.
Well, I mean, we've been second for the whole of the year. That was the position that we occupied for the majority of the season, and I think as the league, we were the second best team in terms of our league performances last season. As the league will testify. Yeah, it wasn't ever close with City, so it was always a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. No one really cared about whether they finished second or third or fourth, but obviously I'd far rather have Champions League football sewn up and finish with second in the bag rather than going into the final 2 games of the season with the outside chance of finishing outside the top 4. In terms of the marquee signings, I take your point. There have been, we've made a lot of big signings, but the players that you listed, I would argue, arguably none of them, with the exception of maybe Sanchez, fall into that category. Lukaku was signed as a 23-year-old main centre-forward for the next 10 years. He's had a very good first season, and as was shown from the World Cup.
Fantastic player, by the way.
Yeah,
amazing.
He will be excellent.
When you signed him, I thought, holy shit, we've got something to worry about here. And for the first 10 games of the season, it genuinely looked like that. And then it just petered away. It was almost like Mourinho thought, okay, I've got that sorted. Now I'll just worry about my defence. And all of a sudden, you only worried about your defence, and you forgot how to attack for the rest of the season.
That's an interesting point. I think that brings us sort of nicely on to what one of the key hopes for me and most United fans is in this post-season. I think you touched on there with the idea that Mourinho's defensive tactics, or certainly some of the reason for his setup, was because he didn't trust defenders that had Phil Jones, Smalling, Rojo in the team. He didn't have confidence in his defence being able to keep a clean sheet. Therefore, he sacrificed a couple of degrees of his attacking freedom to enable a midfield to shield the defence, to play overly defensive, and to mop up and give him that extra assurances. So the hope for myself is that with the right signings in defence, we will see that as being what releases the current attacking squad, rather than us needing to go out and buy a new left winger or right winger.
I can't help but see Mourinho as a bit more of a manager than an actual coach. I think he is really good at pressing players into performing at their top level, but I think the way that he manages is so intense that it can only be sustained for a short time, and I think that's why ultimately he's moved on from clubs after 2 or 3 years. I think the players start to hate him after a while. I think, and am I right in saying this is his 3rd year at United?
Correct, yeah.
Are we entering a year where the players are about to hate him?
Well, this is it. And in his previous form would indicate that, yes. It's his 3rd season, which has, at Chelsea, led to that most recent meltdown where the staff and players couldn't stand him and would not play for him anymore. Similar happened at Real Madrid. And his career to this point would certainly indicate that. What United fans have got to be optimistic of is the fact that Mourinho has spoken at length about him seeing this move to United as being his chance to build a legacy, probably the one thing in football that he hasn't actually done yet.
But hang on, I just want to pick you up on the point that you've mentioned that they should be optimistic about the fact that he sees himself staying here. And I have to say, I think he's been, of all the places that he's been, when he came into Chelsea, there was such optimism. When he came into Milan, huge optimism. When he came into Real Madrid, huge optimism. When he's coming to United, I think initially, yes, you've got huge optimism. And I understand you won two titles in your first season. That's great.
He counts the the Charity Shield.
The friendly bit is the Charity Shield.
As a title as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's
loser.
3. We're on 23.
Anyway, so but the fact is, he won nothing last season, and you never looked like a side that was going to challenge for anything. So, what optimism is there that he can actually do anything different? And he's done this. Having spent what 300 odd million. Yeah, and he said at one point last season, 300 million isn't enough.
Yeah, and I think
so. What
that is the world we live in.
Have?
It probably is.
How much does he need? Does he need 700, 800 million to spend enough to catch Man City? Is that what he's actually? Is that his mentality?
It could be that's what he needs. He clearly needs more players. Our first 11 and our squad as a whole is clearly inferior to City's. City have spent their money better, yes, but they have also spent more money, and they were working at a stronger situation when both managers came into their clubs. Here's an interesting point.
Would Pep need to spend as much money as Mourinho to win the league?
I would say so. I mean, I think that Pep has spent more money, obviously, than Mourinho on the City team. And again, if you look at their teams when both managers arrived, City were already within the possession of 3 or 4 very, very good players who have gone on to be his central players. Players like De Bruyne, players like David Silva, players like Otamendi and company at the back, even though company hasn't been playing quite as much. They've still been the spine of Pep's team, and that was the team he inherited. What Mourinho inherited at Man United was an aging Wayne Rooney who he had to bring out. Instead of Silva, he was inheriting Michael Carrick, who couldn't play all season.
When he came to City, Otamendi was the joke of the Premier League. Mm-hmm. It was the absolute butt of all jokes. He'd had the most awful season that any player could ever hope to imagine to have at a top flight club. It was horrendous, and you could say that Pep has turned Otamendi into the player that you said he had at the club, but he didn't buy that player. He's turned him into that player. He's turned Sterling into a player that had great promise, into a player that's finishing, a reliable finisher week in, week out. He's turned him into that player. Why hasn't Mourinho done the same for United? Why hasn't he turned players? You would argue that Lingard has become one of those players, maybe. But I think you've got maybe one player that you could say that has improved under Mourinho's tenure. Well, everybody else, I think, is struggling to meet the form that they've had previously.
Lingard's a clear example, you're right. For other players other than Lingard, I think you could also clump Ashley Young in with there. I think he's, from a winger, has shown himself to be a very accomplished left back, if not as glamorous or as sort of naturally impactful as Lingard. Certainly another player who's been able to listen to Jose's instructions and has been a bit of a leader on the pitch for Jose. But I do take your point, and clearly Pep has done a better job at working what he's got. He has also had more to start with, but he's also done a lot more to improve what he's got, without a doubt. Both of those things are true. However, Pep has signed, I think, at the current standing, 10 more players than Jose Mourinho since he's been here. And even though he spent, I think, about 50 million more or something like that.
So not much more for 10 extra
Exactly.
players.
It's that fact, though, I would say. The fact that most of Mourinho's signings have been good, I would say, have improved us.
I have a theory about Mourinho.
But he hasn't signed a new team.
I have a theory about Mourinho that he signs players that he hopes will do the job for him without him having to have any input. It comes back to me not thinking he's a coach. I think he's a man manager, and I think he gets a bunch of players that he thinks are great, and he just says, right, go out and play.
Yeah,
and I think he sets them up to be very difficult to be beaten defensively, and then he just relies on players like previously, like he has Hazard and Drogba, and I think he just says, go out and play and go and win me the match. And I don't think there's much more to it. Mourinho, I used to think that he was the only man in world football that could rival Ferguson for the title of best manager in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I now think he doesn't even come close. I think it's actually embarrassing now how bad his teams perform, given the amount of money he spends.
I would.
I say bad they perform in inverted commas, because obviously they can still win titles.
And
but
get results, yeah.
I think they almost win titles in spite of Mourinho rather than because of him.
Yes, but I mean, his teams certainly have a very clear image, and they are built in the image of him every time. When you think of the counter-attacking side of Real Madrid, the initial Chelsea team, which was pretty revolutionary as far as the Premier League goes, they're definitely in his image. So, in spite of him, might be, I think, a bit far. But they are all players that he has bought who have had very high reputations and have performed very well for him. In terms of the comparison with Ferguson, I would agree, but I would agree with the large caveat of this is Mourinho's test. Mourinho has basically been on a job application for United for about the last 4 or 5 years, I would say.
Yeah, I think I remember a story about him crying when Moyes got the job because he wanted it so badly.
And I mean, the game where he was playing Real Madrid, he was the Real Madrid manager who he beat Man United in the Champions League and gave all of those bizarre comments about the best team lost and this is the club that deserved to win. He's obviously been fancying this job for a hell of a long time, and I think the main reason he is, and he's really made no secret of saying this, is because it is his chance to show that he's not just a manager who can come in, win a couple of things, and then leave while the house is burning down with nothing other than his own reputation intact, and that is to build a dynasty of the likes of Ferguson. Now, you could argue football's changed, you could argue that no one can really do that anymore, but clearly that's what he's going to have to do in order to be considered in the same breath as Ferguson.
Yeah, I agree with the comments about him when he came into Chelsea the first time. Yeah, it was revolutionary. I actually really, really loved watching him. It was just great TV to watch him. Just his pure arrogance was just absolutely unfathomable. That he had that amount of confidence in himself and the way that his teams would play. But I think he's lost it. I think he's lost that since Real Madrid. I don't think he has the same confidence. I think he feels like the world is against him, and I think that affects the way that his teams play. I think he feels that he's deserving of a lot more credit than the results that his team get. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like he wants the credit even when his teams play badly.
Yeah, well, his quote last season was, when we win, we all win together, but when we lose, only I lose. And that's definitely a light into how he sees this, I don't want to use the word inferiority complex, but that massive chip on his shoulder where it is, as you say...
Was that as a woe me comment?
Yeah, that was basically, when we win, we all win together, when we lose, it's just me. All of you guys can hide and blame Mourinho.
I don't remember that specific comment. However, I've heard an almost identical comment from Klopp saying, when the team win, they win because of what they do. But when we lose, it's my responsibility. And it was so similar, but the subtle change in words just gives you a reflection of the way that they're interacting with their teams.
Yes,
and
I would agree.
Klopp is basically saying, anything that we do wrong is because of me. I set the team up, I tell us how to play, I do everything I can to make us win. If we don't win, it's because of me. If we do win, it's because of what the players do on the pitch. And I think that enables your players to go out with freedom to say that if we win, I've done it. And if we lose, it's not my fault.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that is that's where you want your squad to be when they step on the field. And I think Mourinho does it in a very different way. He has his players who are drilled and who can take a psychological battle of becoming a Mourinho player, basically. But a lot of players can't do that, and I think there is a concern that the modern footballer maybe is not ideally suited to that. Klopp, and probably more so Pep, is a master of managing modern squads with either stroking their egos when they need to be stroked and just making sure that everybody is happy and working towards one objective. Mourinho so far.
Interestingly, though, I've heard that Guardiola is a really hard taskmaster. Mm-hmm. I've heard he's really difficult to play for, and that often players don't get on with him. But he often stays at clubs for a long time, and it's the players that are moved on rather than the manager, as it is with Mourinho.
Yeah, that might be true. I mean, it was only really Barcelona, wasn't it, where he stayed?
It's not a black and white situation. Yeah, you've got when Mourinho left Inter Milan. I remember there was like players out in the tunnel crying and hugging him, and it was like their dad was leaving and they wouldn't see him again. Mm-hmm. There was such a clear bond, which I've never seen with Mourinho and his players before. I've never seen him like that with his players.
I think Chelsea. I think the Chelsea, where you think of the impact he had on John Terry, Lampard.
I'm just on about. There was clearly a bond there. I just mean in terms of the severity of the. It was so clear that the players loved him and absolutely loved him to bits, and genuinely wanted him to stay and regretted him leaving.
Yeah,
and I don't think I've seen that. Certainly, there's not been any media stories to echo that kind of response.
Well, the only similar
been at Madrid.
The only similar thing I think you could say is when Hazard finished the season where Mourinho's third season at his second stint at Chelsea, after the players basically down tools and Mourinho was sacked, and it was about December time, wasn't it, when he was let go at the team languishing in the bottom half of the league. Hazard texted him at the end of the season, basically saying, "I'm really sorry I let you down. I feel personally responsible that I wasn't able to perform for you at those levels. It wasn't your fault. I'm very, very sorry." And
is that not just because Hazard is a sound guy?
Well, I would think it's testament to the fact that, as you were saying, Mourinho gets strong emotions out of his players, whether that's love, hate, or just the bond from being in that sort of in a team of a manager who you never know whether one day he's going to put his arm around you and say you're the greatest individual to have ever walked on the football pitch, or the other say you're useless and we're going to sell you to Real Madrid. At the press conference,
in Shaw's case, you're a fat shit and you don't deserve to be.
Shaw is the perfect example where he can be absolutely cutting in a way that most other managers would never, certainly not do publicly. He uses the press conference to be the second game, I think is Mourinho's famous quote. The game starts on the press conference, and he does need to get that at United. He has yet to. He feels like at the moment he's straining under the weight of the club and their expectations in a way that he never really had at Chelsea. He never really had at Inter. Perhaps he did at Real rather, but he was never actually able to cope with it at Real. And he has to get his head around that. He has to understand that this is what working at a club with these expectations has. He can't just play the underdog card every time and have fans happy that he's getting them to the odd final and the odd trophy.
Especially when he's spending at these kind of levels.
Exactly. And fans expect success at United, and they expect the team to play in a certain way, and the club is followed around the world, and every word he says is followed around the world. And that appeals to his ego, and I think that's no doubt why he wants to build a dynasty there. But it's also one of his biggest failings in the last year or two has been his inability to seem like he actually has. He can take a job of that magnitude and without letting it cause another situation at Chelsea where he just ends up pissing everybody off and burning the club down.
I'm going to put this out there, right? I do not think United will win a title under Jose Mourinho. I don't think you can spend. I don't think there's enough money in the world that you guys can spend and win the title under Mourinho. I think there's too many good bosses that are better with the teams they have that would finish ahead of Mourinho.
Because of why his style of football.
Yeah, mainly because of the style of football.
I think it's outdated.
I think there's an element of that. Yeah, I think people are basically countering the park the bus mode. and certainly the larger teams. His record against the bigger teams has been very poor for a number of seasons. He did better last season, but I think it's been very poor for a long time, and I don't think he can rely on beating the smaller teams as much as he used to rely on that. The year that Chelsea set the record point score, his record against the bottom half of teams was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I think he beat, out of the 20 games that he played against the teams that finished in the bottom half of the table, I think he won 19.
Wow.
And it was absolutely ridiculously good. And I don't think you can necessarily rely on that in the Premier League these days. That's maybe poo-pooed a bit by the fact that Man City did the same this season.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think the way
that sort of consistency.
Sorry, I'll go back to the Mourinho point, is that I don't think that Mourinho can rely on the way that he plays football to allow him to beat the teams in the bottom half of the table. I think teams in the Premier League, top to bottom, are far more willing to attack you home or away, and I think that maybe that's where Man City had their overwhelming success last season, is nobody was willing to attack them. And it was the same when Chelsea were great, it was the same when United were great. Teams just were so wary of them, they barely left their own half.
I think that's true, but I think that can only last for a season or two.
Yeah, until teams figure you out.
Yeah.
So I think the way Liverpool and United and all the other teams maybe close the gap to City, I think the biggest way is other teams figure them out.
Yeah.
So they don't just get such an easy job against those lower ranked teams.
I would agree. I think that Mourinho has said publicly as well that if City have the same season as they did last year, they'll win it. I don't think he's made any bones about the fact that if this season is the new standard, then there's no way to catch a team that finishes on over 100 points.
They're phenomenal. Let's make no bones about it.
Absolutely.
They were phenomenal.
You can park how they got their money or anything like that.
So many players performing on
team,
a different level. There's so many players just performing above anything that we can expect.
Yeah, they're a class apart, and the possibility of them being a class apart this season as well is very high. And I think that's why we have to take stock in the fact that as a league we have some of the best managers in the world who are currently trying to stop it becoming a one horse race, becoming the German league. What Mourinho has to do specifically, I think, is to find a system that lets the horses run free, as his phrase was last season before the Liverpool game, to let his attacking players express themselves and to not absolutely shackle them up. We have to assume that it was primarily because of his lack of faith in the defence. So I think the signing of Delot, the 19-year-old right back from Porto, is a start. I think he might not have a great first team presence next season, but at least that strengthens our defence. I think the addition of either a centre back, but predominantly a left back and a right back, would really help him to see our team more as a unit and not something that has to be babysat by playing two defensive midfielders. I think that's the first thing. I think if he signs a player who will lift the entire mood, whether that Ronaldo might be that horse might have bolted, I think with what we're hearing about him in Juve and his age, it's perhaps not a deal that United thought was worth their time, and I can see the merit in that. But some signing has to happen to capture the imagination.
Which position? Any position? Or?
I would say so. I think what we're crying out for in attack is a right winger. So anyone who could play on the right and as a big name signing.
I think you've fallen into that trap in the last 4 or 5 seasons, though, of just signing a big name without signing a player to play in a position that you need.
True.
What is the identity of United? Who is going to improve you as a team and identify that gap and sign a player to fill that gap rather than signing any player that's available?
No, agreed. We definitely have to move away from that. When you signed Di Maria,
it wasn't because he was going to fix all your problems. It was because he was a big name that was available.
Agreed. And it was similar with Sanchez, where we are signing that player primarily because he's available and we don't want him to go to City.
Yeah.
And it's not because we have a plan for him. And that's the biggest example, I think, of just how our transfer policy is completely driven by the immediate rather than any sort of forward planning. Areas of the team that need strengthening: left back, right back, and right wing, I think are huge problem areas. And
what about your backups? What about, are you happy with your backups, like the likes of Lukaku?
Yes, provided that Martial stays, I think between him and Rashford, we have a reserve striker.
You think Martial will?
Yeah, well, I would say at the moment it looks like that he'll go. Obviously, I don't want to speculate too much, but from what he has said, from what the noises that his agent are making, it seems pretty clear that Mourinho doesn't particularly trust him and would like to see that talent leave. Which is, for United fans, again, the fact that this could be a window where Martial leaves and Fellaini is given a new 2-year deal is just underlines that fact of wanting to play in a particular style that captures the imagination and gets away from the flatness at the end of last season. New players would help to that extent, but it has to be a change in focus, really. And if that's from having more confidence in the defence, whatever it takes to allow Mourinho to just give a bit more freedom to some very, very good attackers that we have now and have them playing in a coherent system is far more important than signing, a new squad.
So last season, you sounded a lot like a Liverpool supporter, saying this is our year, we've turned a corner, etc., etc. What are you thinking? If, as things stand, where do you think you'll finish?
Well, I have to be honest. I think the end to last season was as flat and negative as I can really remember, to be honest. We did have the silver lining of the FA Cup final, but obviously the result of that wasn't great. And even if we'd won that, it would have been a very negative end. Some of those games were... I felt sorry for every fan who travelled away to go to some of those last couple of matches because the team just could not be asked and did not care. So taking that into the new season will be absolutely terrible. Therefore, we have to make some considerable changes in the summer. I think that the way we ended last season shows that a rework of Jose's philosophy is needed, really. Jose is not going to all of a sudden overnight consider the errors of his ways and think, yeah, we'll just let all of our players out there and run completely free and easy. He's going to be a predominantly defensive manager who is first and foremost concerned with the organisation of his squad and the organisation of his team not to concede. To go into the next season with any sort of optimism, we have to basically take solace from the fact that we were the second best team in the league, that the gap is, I guess, physically smaller for us than for any of the other teams in terms of points. City will not have the same season as they did last year, therefore the gap will be even smaller for that reason. Lukaku will have had another season to settle in, and the patch of not scoring that he had in December will hopefully not repeat. And between all those things, there is a cause to be optimistic. However, it will also rely on players who have chronically underperformed developing a system that gets the best out of them. And for that, I'm talking about Pogba, I'm talking about Rashford, I'm talking about, to a lesser extent, Lukaku himself, because he does look a better player for Belgium than he does for United at the moment, as we've seen in this World Cup. And finding a system that can get the best out of what we've got, more so than signing an entirely new front line, is, I think, what will give United fans optimism. And if Mourinho can solidify his defence enough to be comfortable in finding that system, can bring in a new backroom staff, because the assistant manager left, and he will be replacing him internally, but will hopefully give him some fresh ideas on how to set up a team. If that happens, then there is a reason that with the riches that we've got available to us at the moment, we could close the gap and we could potentially challenge for the title, because that's the minimum expectation from United fans at this point.
I think if you switch the managers of United and City, I think Guardiola finishes a lot closer to Mourinho than...
Closer, but not necessarily ahead of.
Not necessarily, but I think it's a much, much, much closer race. I think something you touched on earlier was they have a better team, which they do, but I don't think that's because of the money that Guardiola spent. I think that's because of the time that he spent with the team. And I don't think that Mourinho will have the same impact on players, and I don't think we're going to see an improvement from your key players. I've got to be honest. I think we'll see an inconsistent Paul Pogba next season. I think we'll see an inconsistent Lukaku. I think we may even see, and this might lead to you finishing outside the top 4, we may even see an inconsistent David De Gea.
And that will make that difference. Yeah, he's that important to us. You mean because of his World Cup performances?
Yeah,
why he will be inconsistent? Yeah, perhaps.
And particularly if your defence continues to struggle. If you don't plug those gaps, if you don't see an improvement in the defence, I think the pressure will come on. You might have teams looking at him. You might have players looking at him from lower side teams thinking he's a dodgy keeper. And the only reason he's been considered good over the last few seasons is we haven't been testing him. We need to test this guy from distance more often.
I disagree with that. I mean, the facts or the statistics on David De Gea over the last 2 seasons has been pretty remarkable in terms of keepers for a top side, in that as well as having the record number of clean sheets in the last 2 years, he's also saved the record number of shots, and he's had the highest number of expected goals against him that he's saved. So it's unlike any other.
We'll see if that continues after his dodgy World Cup.
Well, yeah, the World Cup certainly set that back. I think he only saved something like 2 out of the 10 shots on target or something like that.
He did seem to have butts out during the.
Yeah, he had a terrible tournament by his standards, and that's the worry is. I don't even think it's a worry. De Gea has been our best player for 4 years, and he will come back to United, and we won't think twice about what he did in the World Cup.
If he's not bought in the interim.
Who will buy him now? That's the thing. They're all
looking for a new keeper. They've been touted as buying him. I've not heard any rumours about them buying him specifically. It's more been about Real looking at Alisson, actually.
Yeah, and I think that the masterstroke that Jose Mourinho played in persuading David to drop quite a lot of bollocks at the World Cup and to play very badly in the World Cup, he has just secured his long-term future.
Maybe.
That's what he brings to you that Pep doesn't, as well as clean piss. I think he will come back to United with, obviously very disappointed that he didn't perform for Spain in the World Cup. However, none of Spain performed, and I know in the Spanish media he's getting vilified at the moment, but he was one of a number of disappointing players for Spain, and a goalkeeper is not going to be the difference unless he drops absolute clangers. A goalkeeper wasn't the reason why they didn't create a goal against Russia. It was not down to him why they went out, and he'll come back to Manchester, and I have no doubt pick up exactly where he left off for us last season, which was as the best goalkeeper in the world.
Okay, so as things stand, I'm predicting a 4th place finish in the league for United. How are you seeing things?
I would say 3rd. I think that City were so superior last season that, barring a fantastic end to the transfer window or a remarkable season from United, it's going to be very, very difficult to catch them. I also think that other teams in the top 4 have strengthened well. Particularly Liverpool have made some smart signings so far, so it will be harder to finish ahead of them. I think all of the top 4 will be closer than last season. I don't think there'll be one team that's absolutely running away with it, but I would say the expectation is that we challenge City for the title, but in reality, I think unless there's a serious change in our fortunes in the transfer market, that we will finish 3rd behind City and another, and that another will be between Liverpool and Spurs. Spurs back to their home ground, Liverpool having signed quite smartly and building on the good end of the season they had.
Okay, how's your Saltaire blonde been?
delicious. It's fine session beer, and that's proving the same. The next pint in, fruity, nice, refreshing lager for a good Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
How about you?
Feels good on the palate.
Amen to that.
I think it's time to think another.
I think it is. Amen.